3 men wagered the Duke of Alderley would never marry. He answered by putting his entire fortune on the table. Then he said her name.
The card room at Winthrop's kept its own hours, and Edmund Calloway, Duke of Alderley, had spent most of the last 6 years inside it. His father's will had set a deadline instead of an allowance: marry before his 30th birthday, or the estate's unentailed lands passed to his cousin. 5 weeks remained. Everyone at the table knew it, because everyone at the table had money on it.
Miss Hester Colby did not play cards. She made them. Her father's shop on Cheswick Row had supplied Winthrop's with its decks for 11 years, and she had kept the trade after he died, embossing one small thistle into the corner of every card she cut and pressed, the way he'd taught her, so a Colby deck could always be known by touch alone in a dim room. She delivered fresh decks herself on Thursdays, collected payment, and left before anyone thought to offer her a chair. No one at the club had ever asked her name.
Percival Calloway had counted the weeks aloud more than once, always pleasant about it, always precise. He stood to inherit everything his cousin failed to secure in time, and he had gotten very good at waiting. He kept a small calendar in his coat pocket, not because he needed reminding, but because he liked watching other men do the arithmetic themselves. Edmund had a reputation at Winthrop's for never once losing his composure at a table, win or lose. Men found it unnerving. It was, in fact, the only performance he had left. The rest of his life had been decided for him by a document he hadn't written and a birthday he couldn't move. Tonight, a fresh Colby deck sat unopened at the center of the table.
The room went quiet, the way it did when a hand was about to turn. 5 weeks, Thorpe said, sliding coin forward. I'll wager the Duke sees 30 a bachelor. 3 others joined him before Edmund had touched his cards. He let the wager sit a long moment, unbothered, the way he let every bad hand sit before folding it. Then he reached past the coins, opened the fresh deck, and turned the top card face up on the table. A small embossed thistle sat in the corner. I've wagered worse hands on surer odds, he said, dry, to no one in particular. He set the deed to his unentailed farms beside the coin. I'll marry within the month. Miss Hester Colby of Cheswick Row, if she'll have me. No one at the table breathed for a full second. Thorpe laughed first, thinking it a bluff, until he saw Edmund's face and stopped. Deal again, Edmund said. By the time the story reached Cheswick Row, it had grown a life of its own. A regular customer arrived breathless before Hester had finished her tea, repeating what she'd heard third hand. The Duke had staked his own land on a marriage and named the card maker as the prize, as if she were a hand he'd been dealt, rather than a person he'd met exactly 4 times, always across a counter, always about invoices. Percival made certain the story traveled fastest toward her door. A tradeswoman wagered on like coin would refuse on principle, he reasoned, and refusal was as good as a missed deadline. He was nearly right. Hester asked the customer to leave. The woman lingered, delighted, until asked twice. An hour later, Edmund stood in the same doorway. She told him plainly there was nothing to discuss and reached past him to turn the sign in her window. He didn't move. He wasn't blocking her, exactly. He simply hadn't left. And the doorway wasn't wide enough for her to pretend otherwise. You used my name to win an argument with men who don't know my face, she said. I know, he said. I don't know why I said your name instead of telling them to take the wager back. I should have had a better answer than that. She turned back to the counter, began stacking unsold decks that didn't need stacking, a task invented purely to have somewhere to put her hands that wasn't him.
He didn't follow her behind the counter. He simply waited by the door until the stacking ran out of decks. Then why did you say it? He didn't have one yet. He said so. And that, at least, she believed.
3 days later, she came to his townhouse with the club's account book under her arm, the final invoice for the ruined deck marked and ready. A practical errand. Nothing that required his study, his fire, or the hour it would take to walk there and back. She'd told herself all 3 excuses on the way regardless. He received her in a plain room with more ledgers than furniture, and a fire someone else had clearly lit for him. She set the invoice on his desk, said the total plainly, and waited for him to reach for his pen. He didn't reach for it.
"You mark every card you cut," he said instead, "so a Colby deck can be known by touch in a room too dark to read by. I've spent 6 years at that table, learning which men bluff and which men fold. And in all that time, you're the only pattern I've ever trusted before I understood why I trusted it. I didn't say your name to win an argument. I said it because it was the truest card I had, and I'd been holding it for longer than I let myself notice." She had no answer ready for that. She set her father's thistle stamp on the corner of the invoice instead of her signature, pressed it once, and left without another word.
The rumor collapsed within the week once Percival's solicitor confirmed, with some disappointment, that the will made no mention of trade or birth, only marriage, only the date. Percival stopped counting weeks aloud after that. 9 days passed, no word from Alderley House. Then a small parcel arrived at the shop, wrapped in plain paper, light enough to be nothing. Inside was a single playing card, thistle-marked, with 4 words written directly across its face in his hand. "Deal me in properly."
She turned it over twice before she let herself smile. Not the polite one she gave customers over the counter, but the one she usually kept for closing the shop alone at the end of a long day. Winthrop's card room. The same table, the same hour. This time, before anyone dealt a hand, Edmund asked the steward for a Colby deck by name, opened it himself, and turned the thistle-marked card face up for the whole table to see. Not a wager, not an accident. The first time, her name had been the highest card he had left to play. The second time, it was simply the one he chose to lead with. "Thank you for staying until the end of this one. Next week, a widow, a locked greenhouse, and a debt no one can explain how she paid off. Stay close."